Hey everybody, it is You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions, and this week my first question comes from Highway, who says, "The weather is beginning to change, the first harbingers of fall are present in the occasional cool evenings, and the early colors are coming into the leaves. October and Halloween can be heard in the distance, and the orange and black of retail commercial hell appear on store shelves as if we all may have forgotten how to use a calendar. I wonder how your times were during this season. Had the evil of Halloween been labeled in your elementary years, or did you participate and revel in disguise as I did? I can see a very young Shives sporting a Batman costume with pure, unadulterated glee. Do you lack any give a shit for the holiday? What, if any, are your fondest memories of Halloween? Do you have any traditions with Ashley, or do you all close up house, shut off lights, and hope nobody knocks?" Before I answer the question, I would just like to note, if you couldn't tell from the occasional use of ellipsis in the on-screen text, I have begun editing your questions for presentation. Some of you guys write these really awesome but really long questions, and it's gotten a little bit absurd, and my wife has mentioned to me multiple times, as have a few of you in the comments, that the questions are getting kind of long. So from now on, if someone asks a really awesome question that I really want to answer, but it's a fucking book, I'm going to truncate it. I'm going to try my best to do it responsibly and to do it in a way that doesn't alter the nature of the question, but just FYI. If you ask a really long question and it gets into the video, it will probably be edited judiciously and thoughtfully by me. So, having said that, Highway, my wife and I are both huge Halloween fans. In fact, we got married on Halloween. Our wedding anniversary is October 31st. It wasn't a Halloween wedding, like we didn't get dressed up or and do anything Halloween related, but we got married on Halloween. So we're both big Halloween fans. When I was a kid, I used to dress up. You're actually completely right. I did dress up as Batman when I was a kid, and for Halloween 1990, I think, I dressed up as Batman, and it was based on the Tim Burton, Michael Keaton movie version, so it was like a black costume, and it was awesome. It's still one of my favorite Halloween costumes I've ever had. And I remember going, and my little brother, who's 5 years younger than me, he dressed as Robin, so we were Batman and Robin that year for Halloween, and it was awesome. Yeah, and I love Halloween. Nobody in my town, at least when I was a kid, I don't know what it's like now, but when I was a kid, nobody in my town really had a problem with Halloween. There weren't the religious protesters. There weren't people saying that Halloween was something that we shouldn't be allowing kids to celebrate. We had Halloween parties at my elementary school. Every year we would have a Halloween parade where all the kids who dressed up on the designated dress up for Halloween day, whatever that was at school, would go out, and their parents would come, and we would march all the way around the school building. So it was lovely, and we had a great time. Druid City Comic. Out of these three Evo Psych-related MRA talking points, which one do you think is the stupidest? 1. Women are naturally hypergamous, naturally seek to marry up. 2. Neoteny, childlike features in women cause men to feel protective of them. 3. The usual alpha-beta male nonsense. Of those three, I think the stupidest and also the most overtly misogynistic is the first one, which suggests that natural selection has shaped women into gold diggers. Oh, they just can't help it. It's in their genes. They're gold diggers. They naturally want to find a man who's better off than they are and latch on to him. It's just the way they are. But they all three of the the points you mentioned have the same problem, which is they seek to use supposed biological facts to justify the attitudes of the people making the point. All of these anti-woman paranoid fantasies that men's rights activists love to spread around in their little bubble, that she's just going to take you for your money, and she will, the law is always on her side. They always take up for the poor woman. The poor woman is always playing the victim, and everybody always sides with her, and nobody ever wants to side with the man. It's always on the man's shoulder. It's always up to the man, and nobody ever helps the man. They all want to help the poor defenseless woman. Like, all those really ugly, immature, bitter, misogynistic attitudes that are heard and seen throughout the manosphere. seek to find justification in that evolutionary psychology, in the idea that, well, that's just the way we're made. It's just the way we're evolved. They can't help but be that way. And even if all of those things are true, it's no excuse for being a misogynistic, paranoid, bigoted asshole. And that is what the MRA represents. Misogynistic, paranoid, bigoted assholes. The chemistry question. Steve, I need your advice. When you talk about feminism, you approach it in a way I can respect and actually learn from. However, I'm taking a social justice class right now that approaches it by more telling me what to think about things than how to think about them. And on several occasions, it has misrepresented science and even compared biologists to Hitler. I'm someone who cannot learn from someone unless I respect them. How do I find a way to respect the instructor and respect the material when it attacks rather than informs? Once again, I ask because I really like how you bring up these issues and deal with them. I feel I've learned things from it and even changed my mind on a couple issues. Thanks as always, Jordan. This is a tough one because you're in a classroom situation where you have to learn things and you have to presumably pass the class and get a good grade. And the only analogies I can think of that might help you come to an understanding of how to get through that pertain to situations that are not classroom sort of must-win situations. It reminds me of just the idea of not respecting the professor, not respecting the material, or feeling that the material is being presented in an unfair way. It reminds me of something like the movie Remember the Titans. I don't know if you've ever seen that or not, where the message of the movie, the anti-racism message of the movie, is something I am completely on board with. I think it's awesome. I think it's great that Disney makes a sports movie that will attract football fans, and the message of the movie is racism is bad. But the way the message is relayed is awful. Remember the Titans is a terrible, terrible, terrible movie. It's pandering and preachy and schmaltzy and just full of cliches and full of just, pap and treacle, and it's just fucking terrible. It's just a fucking terrible movie. Maybe there is an analogy to be drawn between that attitude and your situation in the classroom. You're taking a social justice class. I assume that you will find yourself maybe agreeing with the professor in some ways. If the professor is distorting science, is misrepresenting biology, that's a whole different problem. But my advice would be to look for the areas of connection where you can find them. Look for the areas of understanding and agreement where you can find them. And try to look at the professor as a person with a point of view who is teaching the class in the way that he or she honestly believes the class should be taught, even if you think that it is horseshit. Just look for something like that, just as a lifeline, just as something to cling to until you can get through the class. Because all you have to do is get to the end of the class and pass the fucking thing, and then you can move on, and you can take whatever you learned from it with you, and the bad experience you can leave behind. I have no idea if this rambling answer has helped you at all. I would look for anything positive and good and agreeable about the professor and the material that you can cling to and sort of latch onto, and use that to pull yourself through to the end of the class, and just get through the class. Brad Ladd 56. Hey Steve, in relation to the Ninja Turtles question you were asked, since you weren't a big fan of them, what were you a fan of cartoon-wise growing up? He-Man. Cartoon-wise, He-Man was the alpha and omega for me. I was a He-Man fan from when I was in, probably even before I was in kindergarten, because that show was on, and starting in like 1983 or 1984 or something like that. It started when I was born in 1980, so I was super young when the show started, and I remember watching it through elementary school. Because it was on for years. They would run reruns of it, and they made a lot of episodes. So I think they wound up making like 120 episodes of He-Man altogether. So that was a really long run for like a a Saturday morning, or actually more of an afternoon cartoon show, because I would watch it. I would watch it when I came home from school. When I eventually started school, I would watch it in the afternoon when I got home from school. I would look forward to it all day. Had all the action figures, had like one of the plastic swords. I was fucking all about He-Man. Other than that, Super Friends, which eventually became Challenge of the Super Friends, which eventually became the legendary Superpowers show. I loved all of that stuff. That was probably my first exposure to, Superman and Batman and the DC Comics characters, and I loved all of those. What else? What else did I watch? The old Bugs Bunny cartoons. I still love Bugs Bunny to this day. Bugs Bunny used to be something that they would play like all the time. They would play it in the morning. I would watch it in the morning. A local TV station would play it before I would go off to school. So I would watch Bugs Bunny cartoons early in the morning. Yeah, there were a lot of cartoons that I really enjoyed, and a lot of them that I still enjoy today. But He-Man was the big one. He-Man was the master of my universe. Bent Kent. Hi, Steve. Hope you had a great summer. I'm an atheist not unlike yourself. Twice I have seen this guy standing at the intersection of two of the busiest streets in the city where I live. He stands there wearing a sign with writing all over it that says stuff like Jesus will save you and let God into your heart, and it really pisses me off. Not because he is religious, but because he stands there trying to force it on everybody who drives or walks by. Have you ever encountered something like this? Does this kind of thing ever bother you? It bothers me when I think about it, but for a slightly different reason than the one you describe. It bothers me because I can't help but think that it is an entirely futile gesture. How many people is this guy really going to save by holding up a sign by the side of the road? It seems to me like something that you do just to check off a box. In the New Testament, Jesus commands his followers to go out and spread the good news, to go out and preach the gospel. So many Christians take this as directed at them personally. Many Christians take the Great Commission as Jesus telling not just his followers that were supposedly gathered there at the time, but everybody who becomes his follower forever. You all have to go out and you have to tell people about Jesus, and you have to try and get people to become Christians and be saved. This is a requirement. You have to do this. So I think people like this old guy holding up a sign have said, okay, how can I satisfy this requirement? Let me see. I know, I'll make a sign and I'll stand by the road and I'll hold it up. I'm telling people the good news. I'm fulfilling the Great Commission. Jesus is going to be so happy with me. And actually, I think all they're doing is just wasting their time and occasionally annoying people who get sick of seeing them holding up signs as they drive to work or drive home every day. I'm offended by it because I just think it's a fucking waste of time. Matt Greer. Steve, what are your thoughts on a loved one telling you they love Jesus/God more than you? I've had close family friends tell me this in the past, but I always felt as though they should be a little more mindful when saying this. Even when I was a child, teenager, and religious, I could never come to terms with the fact that I must love someone that I have never met more than my friends and family. Am I being too sensitive, and should I just brush it off as something they feel obligated to say due to the demands that come with being religious? Or do you think I'm justified feeling hurt and offended? I have heard that from people. I've heard people say that not just to me, but I've heard other people say it about or to other family members. I think it's horrible. I think it's one of the most warping, terrible things that religion does to people, is to convince parents or brothers and sisters or husbands and wives that there is something else that they are supposed to love more than their husband or wife or their children or their parents or their friends or whatever they are naturally inclined to think of as the most precious thing to them. Whatever that is, religion is saying, no. It's not that. It's got to be this. Okay? Everybody remember. Okay, sure, yeah, you love your kids. That's great. It's got to be this. It's a terrible thing. It's an incredibly abusive, invasive, intrusive, dehumanizing thing. And I hate it. It's one of my least favorite things about religion, that it forces people. It compels people to do these sorts of things, to make these sort of emotional contortions, and to feel guilt and to feel bad for loving the people that they love. It's a really, really awful thing, and I don't blame you one damn bit for being offended by it, especially if you hear someone that you love saying that about you, saying, I love God more than I love you. That's a really shitty thing to hear. I wouldn't necessarily blame the person, because they've been conditioned to say that and to try and feel that. But I don't blame you one bit for being hurt by it or offended by it, because I'm offended by it too. Starcrafter 13 Terran. Steve, I was wondering how you felt about agnostics and how some in the atheist community treat them. Various opinions that have been attributed to me have been on the fence, wishy-washy, too cowardly to have an opinion one way or the other, and ignoring the evidence. I consider myself an agnostic atheist in regards to all gods presented to me, and they all seem equally impossible. That is not to say I consider higher beings impossible simply because I lack evidence that is rooted in the physical world. What is your opinion on atheists who bash agnostics? Is it a case of this country once again trapped in the black and white mentality that is forced upon every issue of late? Thanks for your time. I see nothing wrong with agnosticism as a position or agnostic as an identity, and I don't really get why atheists feel the need to bash agnostics. It's analogous to, in politics, a moderate. I remember taking a government class in college where there was a girl in my class who was very conservative, and she was talking about, and this is a talking point usually that you hear from conservatives, although liberals will say it sometimes too, that, look, I'm a conservative, but I prefer like a really crazy left-wing liberal to a moderate. Moderates, it's like they just don't know what they want. And that's such a distortion of what a moderate is. A moderate is someone who has political beliefs and opinions and principles, but those beliefs and opinions and principles just happen to fall in the middle of the spectrum of belief. They're not all the way over here, they're not all the way over here, they're here. Doesn't mean that they can't make up their mind. They've made up their mind. And the decisions they've made have placed them here. And it's the same thing with an agnostic, I think. An agnostic is not someone who just, I don't know. It's not even someone who necessarily isn't interested. I know several agnostics who are very, very keenly interested in the questions that atheists and theists grapple with in this great debate community all the time. They're very interested, they're very engaged, they have very strong opinions on things. They just see things in a different way. They have come to a different conclusion than an atheist or a theist has. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think, look, agnosticism is a totally defensible, rational position. I think it's a much more reasonable place to wind up than theism. I don't think there's any evidence that can compel someone, it certainly couldn't compel me, to theism. Agnosticism I completely get. I completely get it. I don't identify as an agnostic. I identify as an atheist. I have come to the conclusion that, based on the lack of evidence of any God, that the most likely scenario is that gods don't exist. So my opinion is that gods don't exist, and I identify for that reason as an atheist. But if you identify as an agnostic, I have no problem with it. I consider you an ally. I consider you someone on my side. I consider you a friend ideologically, not an enemy. These atheists who are so hardline, like, oh, fucking agnostics. Oh, Jesus Christ, those people piss me off. You really need to relax. Rockin' Rob 210. Hey, Steve, I wanted to thank you for answering my question on You Had to Ask episode 100. It felt nice to be a participant rather than a casual observer. My question is a little more serious than the last one, and I'm hoping that you'll give this a crack on the next episode. I've been unemployed for 2 years now. I did some tutoring for guitar lessons on the side, but never as a serious job. I don't have any other excuse for being unemployed, other than I got burnt out on call center jobs. I don't have a degree or certification, and my life just got off track. I know this is really hurting my job search, and a lot of employers tend to frown on periods of unemployment, no matter what the reason. What should I say or do in order to get back into the workforce? Should I tell the truth? Or should I tell the truth? You should make it sound good. You should come up with a way of describing your time unemployed and the reason you became unemployed in a way that sounds good. that sounds acceptable to a prospective employer. And if you have to embellish or spin that a little bit from what the unvarnished truth actually is, I say go for that. I mean, if you really want the job, if you want to end the unemployment and you want to go out and find work, sometimes you have to sell yourself. And that means, distorting the truth a little bit to get your foot in the door. I have no problem with that. I don't see anything wrong with that. As long as you don't misrepresent yourself in a way that, would affect your job performance. Like if you apply for a job that requires a certain skill that you don't have, but you say you have it. I'm not in favor of that. That's misrepresenting yourself, and that's sort of defrauding your potential employer. But as far as explaining why you were unemployed or why you've been unemployed so long or why you left your job in the first place, I think that you should make it sound as good as you possibly can. You should tell the truth that's going to get your ass hired is what you should do. And whatever you can say as far as that to get your foot in the door is okay by me. I'm not your judge, man. I'm not your judge. Rock and Rob? Only God is your judge. And there ain't no God, so... Or maybe there is. Or maybe that's just a signal that it's time for...
The Lightning Round. Rapid fire questions. Glib and adequate answers.
Jack Woodgate. Hello, Steve. What book would you like to see adapted into a movie or TV series? I would love to see a movie based on Michael Chabon's book, The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. It's been in development at various stages over the years, but it's never gotten off the ground. But I would love to see a worthy film made from that book, because that's an awesome book. Copper Chopper. What is your favorite movie released in the last 3 years? I would say probably Her, with Joaquin Phoenix, directed by Spike Jonze. That was a fucking awesome movie. Runner-up, maybe The Master, also starring Joaquin Phoenix. I like Joaquin Phoenix. He's a terrific actor. But yeah, probably Her, if I had to pick one. Captain Andy, what is your favorite vegetable? Lately, it has been squash. I love fried squash, and I love roast squash. If you cut squash up into chunks and maybe coat it with some oil, a little salt and pepper, put it in the oven for a little while, and it comes out nice and crispy and roasted. Oh, squash. Adderall Apocalypse. Hey, Steve, question. Are your parents just kids who got older, or are they unicorns? And when did you realize it either way? Thanks. I never knew my parents. I was raised by badgers. They were atheist badgers, which explains a lot. Not just my atheism, but my dreadful social manners. Adam Firstman, or Firstman, perhaps. Hey, Steve, do you believe that we will ever discover the science to make Jurassic Park for real? And if we ever did, do you think we would make mega dinosaurs fight to the death because we are kind of douchey that way? Yes, and for that reason. Simon Dragon. Hey, Steve, can you explain in a nutshell why it is you are an atheist? Yeah, because I see no evidence compelling a belief in the existence of any God, and on the basis of that lack of evidence, I have concluded that there isn't a God. The same reason why I am an a-leprechaunist or an a-fairyist. I see no evidence that it actually exists, so I don't believe it exists. If I see evidence for it in the future, I'll change my mind. But until then, I'm an atheist. Austin Runge, what is your opinion on school dress codes? I don't really care. Sometimes they're a little hysterical. They're a little puritanical. You have to have this much skin covered. I get the idea. I get that parents want to keep their children from, especially young women, from dressing too provocatively in school. But at the same time, I just, I don't know. I don't really care. As a kid, it was a big deal to me. And my school district never had a dress code, so I don't know why it was that big of a deal to me. But as a kid, I remember being really, really against dress codes. Being just really oh, they're telling us how to dress! Now I don't really care. I don't give a shit. Let the kids dress how they want, or tell them how to dress. Whatever makes you fucking happy. Just get the fucking kids through school, so they can go on with their lives. Joseph Fopiano. Hey Steve, you've made your distaste for screenwriter David Goyer perfectly clear, but what do you think about director Zack Snyder, the guy who directed Man of Steel, Sucker Punch, and the 2004 Dawn of the Dead remake? I thought that his Dawn of the Dead was a lot better than I expected it to be, and I thought his Watchmen was excellent. It was very shaggy, it was very lumpy, there was a lot wrong with it, but it wound up being greater than the sum of its parts, and I think it wound up being a really, really terrific movie, Watchmen. But in general, with those two exceptions, I am not a fan of Snyder's work. I don't like his style. I think he's very undisciplined, very adolescent, very self-indulgent, very excessive. He has a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of Michael Bay-ish tendencies, especially with the way he shoots action and presents action in his films, and just his tendency to include these really just incredibly overlong, unnecessary action sequences in his films. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of Snyder in general, with those exceptions I just mentioned. Solar Dragon 007. Hey Steve, lightning round questioned. Nachos or tacos? Which do you prefer and why? Tacos, because tacos have always been a meal to me, whereas nachos have always been a snack. And going to Taco Bell is sort of like a treat that my wife and I treat ourselves to every once in a while. Like we'll be out in town doing something and I'll say, "I want to go to Taco Bell?" And she'll be like, "Oh," and we'll go to Taco Bell and it'll be a fucking magnificent evening. And it probably takes like 10 years off our lives every time we do it. But Taco Bell. Yeah, tacos above nachos. Although it depends. Sometimes I get into a mood where I really, really want a plate of nachos, like a plate of like really fucking like cheese and jalapenos and sour cream and lettuce and like a loaded nacho platter, you know. Sometimes I get in the mood for that. Usually right after I've just watched Kurt Russell shovel one into his face in Death Proof. I watched Death Proof and I'm like, let's go get nachos. Suggestible. Anyway, that is it for the lightning round. That is it for this episode of You Had to Ask. Before I get out of here, though, I want to give a shout out, as I always do. And the shout out this week goes to Sequester Zone. Sequester Zone's channel is about philosophy, atheism, politics, pop culture, all kinds of stuff. Sequester Zone is an awesome commentator, a really sharp mind, a really great person to turn to for articulate thoughts on all of these sorts of subjects. He's someone else who is sort of in the same category as other people I've shouted out, like Ryan Wiley last week, or like Big Lundy a few weeks ago I did, who come from things from a more philosophical perspective. Which is always interesting to me because I tend to look at things, I try to make things as concrete as I possibly can. I don't naturally go up into the philosophical realm if I can help it. I'm not, I've never been formally educated in philosophy. I'm not terribly well read on philosophical literature. It's just not my wheelhouse. So it's interesting to me to hear other people who are very sound and articulate and know a lot about philosophy and are able to sort of swim those waters with a lot more confidence than I can. And I would say Sequester Zone, of the folks in my sort of circle on YouTube, is one of those. And he has a really awesome channel, and I highly recommend that you check out his stuff. Sequester Zone. Tell him Steve sent you. Or don't. It doesn't matter. I don't really care. But check out his channel. I think it's awesome. He deserves some attention, and if you like it, subscribe, because he deserves it. Look at that. Done. That's it. I'm completely done. Shout out done. Lightning round done. All those other long-ass, rambly answers done. I'll be back to do this all again next week, provided, of course, that you ask me some questions, because in order for me to do this, you have to ask. So please, leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. Ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly, and I will answer as many of them as I possibly can next time. So until then, I will see you, everybody. Have a great week.